Hi there, and welcome to today's Education Week webinar, Why We Created a Portrait of a Graduate. This will be a roundtable discussion. My name is Kendall Hunter, and I'm the Product Marketing Manager at Otus. I'm also a former middle school special education teacher, reading specialist, and today I'll be moderating this webinar for you all. This webinar is sponsored by Otus, a K-12 student data and assessment solution that really helps schools and the students themselves to track progress towards essential skills and competencies outlined in a school's portrait of a graduate. So every student, no matter what their path is prepared for the future. I've got some housekeeping items that I'll go through for you here, and then we'll introduce our leaders and jump into the discussion. Now's a good time to review the technical aspects of the presentation. Please go ahead and check your audio settings on your computer as well as your speaker volume if you're having any audio trouble. If you're having issues, be sure to see the detailed file in the resource list that is for audio troubleshooting. Refreshing your browser will usually solve any issues. If you hear any music or the console freezes, again, just refresh your browser and that will do the trick. There are some other icons that open additional feature panels in the webinar console that I just want to quickly point out to you. Click the resource list to check out a number of items we've put together for you, including more information on how Otus supports schools to track metrics outlined in the portrait of a graduate, or more importantly for you all, most likely, to view examples of portraits that the districts represented here today created. That's a really great resource for you all. You can follow the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Use the hashtag EWWebinar, and don't forget to tag @OtusK12. As we jump into discussion later, we welcome your questions. You can type them in the Q&A box accessible through the tabs located on your console and not in the group chat. That'll just help me be able to locate those questions and toss them to our panelists as we're going here today. If you submitted a question ahead of time, don't worry, we already reviewed those and they will be incorporated into the discussion that we have today. We'll save 5 to 10 minutes at the end for any of your questions that come up as we're going through things here today. Finally, an on-demand archive of today's presentation will be available in the next 24 hours. Both the archive and a free-to-download version of the slides will be accessible through edweek.org using the exact same login that you used today. So with that being said, we are going to start talking about our topic here today, the portrait of a graduate movement. Now, depending on where you're joining us today, which state you're from, you may have heard this called the profile of a learner, the 21st century student profile, a graduate profile. The list goes on, but the idea behind all of this is still really rooted in the same philosophy. So rather than deciding that a student is successful based on the amount of time they've maybe spent in the classroom, the portrait presents a really well-rounded view of what success looks like in today's educational landscape. So you're going to hear from 3 leaders who will discuss the why and how of their portrait of a graduate. And the hope is that through these conversations, you can bring what you learned back to your team to really further discussions around what it means to be future ready. Now, this is truly an incredible group. I'm gonna share a little bit more about each panelist, and then we'll just jump into our discussion. It is a roundtable, so you'll get to hear them really informally, casually discuss these items, and please contribute in the Q&A as we get going here. So first up, I'd like to introduce Dr. Donnell Cannon. Dr. Cannon is the Executive Director of Maureen Joy Charter School in Durham, North Carolina, and the former principal co-founder of North Phillips School of Innovation, a school that was created to provide students with a liberating education that allows them to develop and pursue their passions and purpose while also preparing them to be resilient in the face of challenges. Dr. Cannon also co-hosts the Hummingbird Stories podcast, where they seek to answer the question, what will it take for every child in North Carolina to not only have a sound basic education, but to have experiences that drive them to step boldly into the future they deserve and really create a better world. Highly suggest giving that a listen. That is on Apple Podcasts. As you'll hear from Dr. Cannon himself during the webinar today, Dr. Cannon is passionate about designing, building, and spreading equitable learning environments that really work for all children. Next up, we have Mrs. Lexi Robinson, the coordinator for teaching and learning in North Shore School District 112, serving the diverse communities of Highland Park, Highwood, and Fort Sheridan in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Lexi began her educational journey as a Teach for America teacher, and her early career was marked by a strong commitment to educational equity, exemplified by her role as a founding teacher at Catalyst Maria Charter School. So we actually have two people on the panel here today who are founders or co-founders of charter schools, which is really unique and exceptional. Lexi later transitioned to the role of a math instructional coach and interventionist, and all of these experiences have really uniquely equipped her for the current role, where she focuses on supporting math curriculum, instruction, and assessment, as well as ed tech integrations. Lexi's efforts are central to the district's mission to inspire, innovate, and engage with all members of the community. Last but most certainly not least, we have Dr. Geraldine Johnson. Dr. Johnson is a dedicated educational leader with a 20-year background in K-12 urban education that is marked by a commitment to equity and innovation. Currently serving as an instructional coordinator, Dr. Johnson was instrumental in facilitating the Portrait of a Graduate Vision for 2030 initiative for San Diego Unified School District. Key aspects of Dr. Johnson's approach include shifting the power to students and inviting family and community voices into the process of defining the profile of a graduate educator, as well as the system, effectively structuring educational initiatives to align with district and state priorities, and advocating for continuous improvement and professional growth, bringing both valuable insights into the strategies that enable educators and students to thrive. So, we've got a rockstar panel assembled here for you all, truly experts on these topics and ready to share with you all what they've experienced, some of their reflections, areas of opportunity for the future, and next steps. We are just going to start our panel discussion here now. I am going to start off with Dr. Cannon. Before we jump into kind of the nitty gritty of things, I think it would help for all of us to kind of just set the stage about your school district's portrait and really why you chose to embark on this journey. So Dr. Cannon, can you tell us a little bit more about Maureen Joy's Portrait of a Graduate and how this all began for you all?
Yeah, so it's hard to talk about portrait without talking about like my deepest conviction, the deepest convictions of our school community, because that's where we started in creating our portrait. And so really believe that like systems achieve exactly what they were designed to achieve. And so the inequitable outcomes that we're experiencing ubiquitously are direct results of the inherent flaws in our school system. And not the like inherent flaws of our young people. And so I believe that the industrial model of school was never designed to get us equitable outcomes. And so by nature, it is designed as a one size fit all, and is designed around a set of efficiencies and standards that don't like recognize the variability that our young people bring to schools. So their lived experiences, their life context, their identities, and just so much more. And so it was the model itself was never designed around our young people's specific and unique context. And so we believe the way to truly move closer to equitable outcomes is to design with our young people and families, and is not for them. And so we wanted, the importance of the POL exists in that we wanted to walk hand in hand with our young people to define the set of experiences alongside of them. And so, and I believe that our education system is in crisis because we haven't learned to do that well and created those natural rhythms. And so there's a radical overhaul that feels essential to ensure like young people have access to excellent and equitable like education. And so for us, it's hard for us to define like innovation without defining like equity, because we believe that like the two are just like inseparable in this work. And so like we believe that innovation is a tool to solve problems, and the most urgent problem in education is inequity. And so we wanted to approach how we thought about bold new learning experiences for young people by centering it within like a shared North Star that was created again alongside of our young people. And so to create this like future filled with possibility and equity, where like every young person gets to to thrive in their own context and towards their ambitions as they describe them. We needed to build the type of models and the type of models that our young people deserve. And we needed to take really, really bold action to do something about it. Because we realized that, like, we're going to continue to get the same outcomes if we continue to hold up the same system. Like, nothing wasn't going to change until we like radically redesigned like how we thought about other student experience. And so to do that well, our first step was to create our POL, which is our portrait of a learner, which again just serves as our guiding light in this work. And so our POL is just our agreed upon set of aspirations, agreed upon by our entire school community for what every learner should know and what every learner should be able to do when they leave Joy. We see that as like, this is our silhouette, right? It describes and defines the aims that our young people will work towards. Defining these aims also allows us to decide what kind of learning environments we wanted to build alongside of our school community. And it was important for us that our POL just had four criteria. We wanted to make sure that like it was grounded in our values and it was grounded in our purpose as defined by our school community. We wanted to make sure that it was future focused. So we spent time really combing through what is the future demand of our young people? What are the set of competencies that young people the muscle students need to build? And so we can prepare them for what's up next and the bold future they imagine for themselves. We wanted to make sure it was like fully holistic. So it was balanced and representative of a range of outcomes. So we wanted to create an expansive definition of success and not narrow those that definition. And then we wanted to make sure it was like observable, like we could build a set of look fors to determine how our students were making progress across that POL. And so we created our portrait simply as like as a tool for backwards planning. And it was a tool, it was like an innovation tool to help us essentially like ameliorate the inequitable blemishes across our system. And so we wanted to make sure that that we had like we knew that having a clear like portrait would allow us to design like the kind of learning environment we want to build in alignment with those sets of outcomes and those sets of aims you see there. And we needed a more liberated, student-centered design, and our POL felt like the right way, right? It felt like our anchor, the thing that would ground us the most towards a shared set of outcomes. And so again, I knew that this was the first step for designing the student experience. It was a set of like this was meant to set a clear vision for what we were working towards, and that's why we decided to begin like with the portrait. We needed to have a really strong silhouette together and be able to define that in our community.
Well, thank you so much for sharing more about that. I love that you use that word bold a few times because it's that radical overhaul, right? And that equity begins with the design, and we have to make a change. It's not the flaw of young people. That was so well said. It's the flaw in the school system, and one size just does not fit all, right? So you said that so well. It really doesn't account for those students' lived experiences. So it's really interesting to hear that journey and how expansive your definition is. Like you said, it's not a one size fits all. It's also a definition of a successful student can't be a one size fits all. And that's really that thoughtful aspect. Dr. Johnson, I'd love to hear more about Vision 2030 and really why your school district embarked on this journey to create this future vision of a student.
Yeah, we really wanted to pair, two dual efforts. At the time, we were sunsetting our vision for 2020 and knew that we needed to refine our goals. And at the same time, we wanted to create a portrait of a graduate and knew we needed to unite those efforts if we were really going to have this be a reflection of our communities. As simply as I can put it, it was a reflection of our community's collective aspirations for our students' future and the promise that we were making to ensure that we would adequately prepare them for futures that we haven't imagined yet. And so we wanted students at the center of that work. And what we recognized quickly was that if this is what we are saying for our learners, we needed to ask the question of what do our educators need to do to provide that for our students? And if this is what we want for our educators, what do we need for our system in order to support that throughout? So that's why you see that kind of concentric circle model. As for our whys, we were kind of really propelled by three really strong purposes. One was recognizing that we needed to adapt to change, right? Our technological change, economically, in society, we have to adapt and evolve to better prepare our students for the complexities of the world. We were also really propelled by our drive for community engagement. We had a strong desire to involve the entire community to shape this document, and finally, equity and inclusion. This was really aimed to match the really diverse profile of our district and ensure that every single student throughout our system had access to the opportunities that they need to succeed. So the Portrait of a Graduate initiative was really a commitment to providing that equitable education and fostering a sense of belonging for all of our students, all of our staff, everybody throughout our system.
I love those questions that you shared that prompted your work. What do teachers need to do? What about the system? We know what we want students need to do, but it's similar to what Dr. Cannon said about that backwards design, right? Once we figure out the destination, what are all the things that need to be put in place systematically to get us there? Because it is that multi-tiered approach. And I think that the way that your visual is actually depicted, really, as you're explaining it, I'm like, I do see that in action. Each layer kind of builds on each other. So I think it's really nice. I know our attendees can see that slide too for the vision for 2030, but it nicely lays out that journey that you outlined for us. Lexi, tell us a little bit about North Shore 112 and the Portrait of a Graduate that you all have created, as well as just why you embarked on this journey as a school community.
Yeah, so as many of the other speakers have said, we were really looking for what is our roadmap, what is our guiding principles in order to ensure that our students are successful, not just in the classroom, but beyond in the ever-changing world with technological advances. A lot of the jobs our students are going to have don't even exist today. So how are we preparing them to interact with critical content, with critical thinking skills, and how are we ensuring that we provide a roadmap for both our teachers and our students and community members for what success looks like as a graduate from North Shore School District 112. So out of our superintendent, Dr. Mike Lubefeld's leadership vision, one of the main focuses was to create our Portrait of a Graduate, to provide that roadmap for our students and for our educators so that we can really ensure that our students are fulfilling these competencies so that they can be successful in whatever path they choose to take in the future.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that word roadmap is just, even though we call this like the Portrait of a Graduate or profile of a student, profile of a learner, it's really a roadmap, right? It's a journey, not, not a marathon, or I'm sorry, not a sprint, it's a marathon. We really are on a journey, we have to map out the road to success. So I think that's a great way to really think of it. And I can imagine that's helpful in communicating with the community too around why we're doing this, right? These skills are not just born overnight. These are nurtured from very early on in a child's education. I'd love to talk a bit more with the group. I know I've been showing some visuals on the screen here around our different profiles and portraits and some of the language in those. We had a lot of questions from our registrants around how you choose those skills and competencies, right? There are so many future ready skills that students need to be successful depending on their path. But how did your teams go about really identifying and narrowing down those skills and competencies? I know I heard Dr. Cannon say earlier, they need to be something that we can actually track and use. So how did you all do that and really prioritize relevant and future-oriented skills? Dr. Johnson, I'm going to start with you for Vision 2030, if you wouldn't mind sharing more about how you really narrowed it down and selected and prioritized these skills.
Yeah, we really wrestled with the idea of, because we did do a mix of surveys and some community input sessions, and we wrestled with this idea that if we, in our surveys, provided a list and asked our community to prioritize or select the ones they thought were most important, that might be very leading. So what we did was we created these trend cards where we took some data about, let's say, demographics or the way society's changing with their sense of identity and power, things like data on, the prevalence of AI, or how Generation Z is going to be the most diverse age group to date with their social and political beliefs, things like that. And we provided that information to be a prompt for what we might need in order to accommodate these trends in society. And then really asked questions about what about this scenario? We came up with some like real life situations of perhaps conflict where we asked folks, what skills, what knowledge, what dispositions would our folks need in order to respond in a situation like this? We were trying to draw out characteristics rather than give them a list to choose from, and balanced those two approaches in our data compilation.
That's so interesting. I really appreciate you explaining that approach. I like how you said no leading prompts. I'm just thinking of how many surveys I've taken where it really is kind of getting and narrowing your scope of what you can choose. And it sounds like you all had a much larger net to really try to capture that feedback. That's so interesting. Lexi, how about in North Shore? How did you all go about identifying and really choosing the competencies or items in your roadmap that define those student skills?
We created what we call the Modern Learning Committee. So it was a committee that was comprised of students from multiple buildings. We had fourth graders, fifth graders, sixth graders, seventh graders, and eighth graders as part of our committee. We had parents from the community as well on the committee, teachers, administrators from the district office and from various school buildings, some board members as well, to really get a diverse perspective from various stakeholders. So that committee met and started just with really broad brainstorming. Sort of like Dr. Johnson said, we didn't really want to give any leading prompts. So we sort of just said, let's just brainstorm. People were able to create a wide range of skills and competencies that they felt were really powerful and what they wanted to be included in the portrait of a graduate. And then at subsequent meetings, we would sort of filter those into various buckets or themes until we could then compile them further down into the 7 competencies you see on the screen today.
Follow-up question for you. How long ago did you start that Modern Learning Committee? Like, how long was this journey to kind of get to the bottom of this?
That's a great question. It launched in the 2018-2019 school year. And so it was a full year of developing and meeting together with the committee. So it's not just an overnight process. It wasn't 1 or 2 meetings. It was across multiple meetings across that school year. And then the nice thing about the Modern Learning Committee is that we still meet to this day. It has various different representation from different buildings as students graduate and such. But it's there to continuously help to support, provide updates and such to make sure it stays sustainable.
I love that you all incorporated the student voice. I'm sure other teams did too, but this is the first time we've kind of touched on that. Dr. Cannon, how about Maureen Joy? Tell me a little bit about those skills and competencies. I see 4 on here in this visual, but how did you all go about identifying and really narrowing it down to prioritize these skills?
Yeah, Lexi, I do want to celebrate you because I love how you're putting young people at the front of this work. So we think about the work spiritually in very similar ways at Joy. One thing that felt really important to us as we got started was we knew that like we're gonna like commit to like rethinking boldly about our set of student experiences and then all the conditions that surround that we just needed a dedicated group who was like working towards like this unknown future, right? So like we didn't want to uproot a set of signature experiences for young people, a set of learning experiences for young people without anything to put in its place. And so it's taken time, right? Because we've committed to direction over speed. And so what that means is we're going to do it well, and like we were going to say in honest and good faith that like we've listened and partnered with young people and families to do it right. We've had to just kind of take it slow at the very beginning. And so what that meant was like our process just started with soliciting as much input as possible from our students, our parents, our board members, our staff, and our community more largely. And so we did a significant number of empathy interviews. So we had each one of our staff members across our campus were required to commit to 2 empathy interviews with young people. And they had a set of like guidelines in which they asked questions like, when are you most excited about coming to school? When is your most memorable school experience? When is your favorite vacation? Like you love it when Miss Lexi does this. And so that gave us a set of prompts. So we were collecting the right sets of data. And so we had the right, like we were landing we were landing on the right fodder we needed to move forward. And so we were patient in that. So our staff members committed to empathy interviews. We set up what we call a research and development team, which we now call the Learning Studio, who they're committed to thinking about like our future of our model to ensure that our organization can commit to being far more ambidextrous. And so while we're holding up one part of our model, we're preparing for the next iteration of the full-scale system shifts. And so we had our teachers, our staff members committing to empathy interview young people. We had our research development arm doing that work simultaneously. We also had our research development arm interviewing alumni from our school. We wanted to know where we hit the mark, where we didn't, what they wish they had known more of, what area, the competencies they wish they had developed. We spent time talking to local, professionals. We wanted to know, like, what are the shifts they were experiencing in their workforce? What did they wish we had better prepared our young people for? And so we use that as one set of data. And so the other, we spent a lot of time combing through, similar to Dr. Johnson, it's like combing through what are the future trends? What is the future how's the future being described? What are the competencies that young people are going to need to do well to thrive in an unknown future? And so again, it was a very iterative process, going back to the drawing board, scrapping things, raising new ideas to truly define what was going to be our learning context to make the leaps we needed to make to ensure our young people had access to their boldest aspirations in the future. And so we've wanted to we took that as a set of recommendations for how we wanted to move forward. So after we gathered that data, our learning studio, they kind of synthesized that input into a cohesive, balanced, holistic draft of a portrait. So what you're seeing here, it's one that's gone through so many iterations. We had to go back to those same stakeholders and ask, is this what you meant by? We wanted to go back and ensure that we were hitting the right set of competencies by looking at what are the most common trends that folks are describing, are the set of aims holistic aims that we should be having for young people. We wanted to make sure we went back and pressed that against the data that we had collected. So what that meant was we were prepared to shift and had to. So what you're seeing here is our fourth iteration. It has gone through so much ink and so much sticky notes to try and really define what we wanted to set as our roadmap. And so again, with several iterations, several design phases, we presented each new draft to the same stakeholder groups, and again asked them for even more feedback and revised it in response to that, but continuously got really clear about what is the future trends described, what is the research around that, and how do we continue to bring that all together to have a refined portrait in which to describe our ultimate silhouette for our young people.
I'm just so appreciative that you mentioned all the different versions of this that you've had, because I know when people embark on this process, or I hear questions around this, it's a lot about just kind of being skeptical around how do we make sure this fits. And you said it exactly that right. You have to test it. We have to try it out. We have to get feedback. And it's never too late to reset the table. If this is something that's going to be our North Star, we need to feel confident in it. And it's okay to change it. It's okay to say, hey, we took the feedback, we listened. I love that you did empathy interviews. I just think that's so powerful, because these are living, breathing documents that, we can each year revisit and make sure that it still, is relevant. Each and every district has such a nice, visually appealing portrait of their student, but this isn't just a picture on a wall, right? This isn't just something we slap on our door and we're like, this is what we believe in. It's so much more than that. And I think everything you said there really just reiterates that commitment to that. So thank you for sharing that. I did have a follow-up question. Lexi, I know you talked about stakeholder involvement with your modern learning community. Dr. Cannon, you shared that research and development team, alumni involvement. I just wanted to circle back, Dr. Johnson. One of our attendees was wondering who was involved in creating Vision 2030 and to what extent? So kind of similar around that stakeholder involvement. Any additional teams or folks that you want to spotlight who were part of creating that?
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm really proud of is that early on we realized that we, the adults, needed to get out of the way and turn the work over to students. So we had the idea to hire high school interns to lead this work as they engaged with staff, departments from across the district, parents, business partners, all throughout our community. And I want to be really candid about how we made a big mistake in the beginning. When we first appealed for our high school interns, we got applicants that did not match the diversity and the richness of our demographic profile. And we had to start from scratch. We had to go out to, we have 20 high school sites, and we had to go out and ask students, like, what, why didn't we get more interest here? We had to redesign our flyers. We had to talk to students in passing periods and at lunch to try and encourage more participation. And we didn't stop until we had enough representation from every school site that matched our district profile. And then we trained those high school interns. We met with them twice a week for almost a year, got them ready to facilitate the community engagement process. And I think that was really important in being able to authentically say that this was student-driven, student-centered, and reflective of what our community was asking for. So we did have some adult staff facilitators, myself and a few others, but this document was entirely created by our students, everything down to the graphics. The photography is our own students. They created the graphics. Everything about it was student-driven.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that. I think that's so powerful. And I appreciate you being candid too. This is a process, right? We're all going through it, learning as we go, iterating. And sometimes we do have to take a step back. And I think it sounds like you really push things in the right direction. And I love that the imagery and everything is developed by students. That's super special. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really cool to involve them in that. I want to shift our conversation a little bit here to student-centered approaches and practices. Because we've talked a lot about how this is a vision and it's a roadmap, and we need to kind of work backwards to make sure the system supports the road to reaching these skills and competencies that we've outlined in our portrait. So Lexi, I'm going to start with you, but would you mind sharing are there any examples of student-centered practices that, from your perspective, schools can put in place to be aligned with the future readiness mindset? Maybe they don't have a portrait yet, but they really want to start looking at the system and different practices that might really make a difference in today's educational landscape. Any thoughts for us on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I know in North Shore 112, we grounded a lot of this in our instructional framework. So for us, we utilize the Marzano Art and Science of Teaching. And so we as a system have identified 12 of those elements as the core of our instructional framework. And so we wanted to make this not as something separate or something different or a different initiative. It really needed to feel authentic and part of what we're doing in terms of our teaching and learning on the regular. So we really tried to tie this nicely with some of the elements within our instructional framework to make sure that those practices really were focused on what can I do as the teacher in my classroom to really elicit and support the growth and development of these competencies.
Thank you for shouting out Marzano. We were getting some questions in the chat there around some specific examples. So I appreciate that framework mention that people can bring back or research if they want to start implementing, those practices that really start in the classroom. Dr. Cannon, any thoughts on what Maureen Joy is doing as far as student-centered practices that kind of align with that thinking and preparing students for the future?
Yeah, I can uplift a few. It also feels important to say that, when I talked about direction over speed, we spent some time just kind of experimenting around a set of how do we socialize these aims? What do these aims look like in practice? And we spent a lot of time running sets of pilots to get to know the aims better, right? And those aims, those pilots help reveal its own set of data, which helped essentially bring them more in life form. These are the sets of aims. What are the sets of student experiences that might help us help young people express these aims? Can I make a strategic bet here? And to do that well, we committed to small pilots. We kept them in small containers, 3-week cycles, to learn as much as we could to really describe in its essence, what could these experiences, what could they be to better help us express these sets of aims that are outlined in our portrait. And so I also would say, it's just in general, I'm pretty passionate about practices that centered young people's autonomy and uplifted freedom. And so most of all of our student experiences that we've described that we're going to be skilling next year represent that well, right? They want to make sure young people have autonomy young people, similar to Lexi and Dr. Johnson, young people are at the center of kind of defining and describing those sets of experiences, and uplift their sense of freedom and liberation within our school. And so I think one example of a future ready practice that I have some experience with implementing is just like project-based learning with some soul, right? Like like it allows our young people to like, you know, to act within their current local context by using the scope of like a curriculum and the standards and all the things. And so, so for me, and like I think an excellent PBL model helps students like connect large scale real world issues to their local context. So it makes those big issues relevant and provides like a pathway for students to engage with them meaningfully, and I think create like change at a developmental like appropriate scale. And so I love projects where the final product involves like young people creating something that's tangible and it helps others or educates others. So this can be done, I think, in an academic and context, or can be done for any great age level. And so I believe it's key for young people to have these types of experiences in school, because oftentimes young people have very few opportunities to see themselves as actors and creators in the world. And like I think a PBL experience with some soul, I give young people the at-bats and opportunities to do that. And so this is often exacerbated, I think, with young people who grew up in, you know, in poverty, and young people who are historically oppressed groups, right? We want them to feel big and to say like, oh no, I have power right now, and I can exercise that in the scope of my experience at school. And so it feels important to be able to stand that up and to be able to make that like to bring that into 3D by way of how we think about a set of student experiences. And so it's important for me that like schools acknowledge this inequity in terms of how young people are positioned to engage with the world and address it in authentic ways. So it's like a school model that constantly tells like young people how to act and how to be in the world, but doesn't meaningfully equip young people with the understanding that they can affect the world in itself as an act of inequity, right? Because we're not giving students the opportunity to stand up big and to recognize the sense of like power that they have. And so I think schools need to flip the script. And I think our PBL in some ways is one example of like how do you leverage that, like how do you create the lever that schools can use to do that? I think young people should be designing solutions to problems that are defined in local context.
I love how you describe project-based learning with a soul. We can all take a little something back of that to our classrooms, no doubt, because it really should be meaningful, engaging, and everything that you described. And at the beginning, I just made a little note as you were chatting of like things that were sticking out to me. And I love that you said we have to socialize these aims. Like, what do they look like in practice? And a big takeaway from everything that you're saying is that this entire journey is just asking ourselves more questions. And we have to ask the right questions to move forward. But yeah, socializing these competencies and saying like, what do these truly look like and how do we get students there? I just thought that was so powerful. Dr. Johnson, I want to toss it to you. What about student-centered, or what student-centered practices do you all prioritize in San Diego Unified to really keep students on the path towards that future readiness goal?
I'm right in line with Dr. Cannon with the student voice and choice and project-based learning, inquiry-driven practices that really require that critical thinking and collaboration and problem solving. And the only other thing I would add on top of that is transformational social emotional learning in the context of that multi-tiered systems of support, and how those skills are really critical for future readiness, because it equips our students for how to navigate those social complexities that they'll encounter personally and professionally in every context.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that. And yeah, we're getting some really great questions in as we're chatting here in the Q&A. So thank you so much for the engagement from our audience here today. I know it's June, the end of the school year. People are probably all at different points, and I just so appreciate how busy the chat has been in the QA. We have 2 more planned questions, and then we'll address some live questions. I just want to briefly talk about the community and then ongoing impacts, because I think those are two really big pieces that we haven't touched on as a group. So don't worry, we are not ignoring your questions. We will get to them, and thank you for sending those in. But Lexi, I want to start with you. As far as communication, two C's there, sorry. When did you all bring the community into your portrait and solicit feedback or share a final product? What did that journey look like to involving others outside the school who maybe weren't part of the ideation and development?
Yeah, it's a great question. We, like I said, we had the Modern Learning Committee. So they, at the end of the 2018-2019 school year, presented all of the work that the committee participated in and created at a school board meeting, which was publicized for the public. We also had a student narrated Portrait of a Graduate video. It's a short video that's on our website that anyone can check out that really talks about what is our aspirational vision for the future and what is our Portrait of a Graduate and why did we create it. And so that video was something we shared widely with community members as well.
I love that you involve students in the video. That's fantastic. Very similar to what San Diego did with their art and their imagery. So I'll just, as that's on my mind, I'll toss it to Dr. Johnson. I know you talked a little bit about the community and some of the surveys. What about those who weren't involved in some of that research? How did you all go about sharing Vision 2030? I think you mentioned this is the second vision. You said there was a Vision 2022. So kind of curious how you build on each of those and share out what's changing and how you're prioritizing these competencies and skills that you've identified as a 2030 student.
Yeah, I think the piece about sharing with community, we engaged with community. We had 22 different feedback sessions, thousands of participants. But a piece that I think is really important part of the process was once we did our initial, data collection and produced some initial findings, we brought it back to the community for feedback, like a member check, like, did we hear you right? Did we get this right? Which gave them an opportunity to say, no, not quite, here's a little refinement, or like, yes, that's what we were going for, so that when we ultimately published it, that we can say that, we didn't take it in a different direction that our community wanted to take it.
That's super powerful, just kind of circling back and making sure that we're meeting the mark, because feedback is good, right? Feedback shouldn't be scary. It should help us realign and reassess. One of our registrants or attendees shared a question here today, and I think this is a good phrase. They said, what gets measured gets done. And this one resonates with me a bit, but with this in mind, they are wondering if teams have discussed how you might measure the impact of your portrait and what impact it has on student outcomes, as well as maybe the school's overall performance. Lexi, have you all talked about using any metrics or measuring it all in North Shore for your students?
We're nodding along because that's something our Modern Learning Committee is in the midst of working on now. So we started working on this. We have look-fors that we created with the initial launch, but we didn't feel like they were necessarily as measurable or as actionable as we would have liked to see. So we are working right now as a Modern Learning Committee in collaboration with one of our partners, Defined Learning, to help us come up with some really measurable goals and really to help make it so that they're really much more easier for our staff to monitor and our students to sort of see how they're doing in terms of the development. We're thinking along the lines of grade bands, looking at what it would look like across like K-2, 3-5, and then 6-8. But that's all currently in development. So even though we launched our initial Portrait of a Graduate back in the 2018-2019 school year, we're still making revisions and updates, and that's work we're engaging in currently.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely look forward to seeing and hearing what the results of that are, because I think others will be certainly curious just what those goals look like. Like you said, they have to be goals we can actually track. Dr. Cannon, how about with Maureen Joy? Have you all talked about, I know you talked about envisioning what the practice needs to look like and how we get students there. Have you all had any discussions around how you might measure the impact of this long term?
Yeah. We've talked about it. We've been, obviously, I think like many folks, it's complex in so many ways, right? We've often used like ways to measure indicators of success, like we have the reading, writing, math scores, standardized test. We don't see those as like the goal. We see those as ways that like we might measure how we're making progress towards like aims in our portrait. And so, but our portrait is like fully holistic, right? So like we see that as like how we test the math, English, reading, writing, scripts. Like those are just like fundamental like elements of like, our portrait, but we're measuring like so much more, right? And so like most schools, we use, I think various tools to gather data on academic performance. We also use tools to gather SEL and like cultural data. And over the next like several years, we do expect to see gains in these more traditional data measurements as a result of the implementation of our portrait. And because we believe that if the portrait is truly alive and joy, then we will see its effects throughout the entire school experience. And I think that's what makes it difficult to truly say like this is the one metric that we're going to use to measure our young people's success as it relates to displaying or demonstrating the sets of competencies. And so at the same time, we do recognize that like we're playing the long game, and it would be unreasonable to attribute, I think, short-term growth to the implementation of just our portrait. And so we need to be like far more realistic about our expectations. And so we're going to feel and experience the effects of our portrait implementation before we actually see it reflected consistently in traditional data measures, right? And so like for the shorter term, I think our primary data source is what students, staff, and parents are saying about their experience. I think we like in many ways, I don't think we hold the essence of the qualitative data like high enough, right? And that helps us truly in many ways like better understand the progress that we're making towards some of these aims. And of course, like we'll continue to define like how we measure specific competencies that we may not be able to capture within those qualitative measures. But we collect this data through I think a variety of methods. So we survey, and we're constantly doing focus groups. So I told you we ran the 6 cycles this last year, 6 pilot cycles. We're engaged like different sorts of young people, different sorts of teachers, and after each of those cycles, we were able to pull them in focus groups to better understand like one, how did this feel? Also, are we making the progress against these new sets of like indicators of success? These expanded definition of success for young people. We've also allowed us, I think, to really pull out, like if we were to double click on these aims, what are the supporting skills and mindsets that fall out? And so we made a few bets before going into each pilot, and we were able to then press that against like what we were seeing as a flow of data from those focus groups. And then we continuously do the empathy interviews with our young people families to better understand their experience. And so I think this is how we'll gain like early indications of the degree to which like the experiences we've designed are producing the outcomes that they were intended to in alignment with the portrait. And I think that like again, the elephant in the room is like I think we have to move away. We have to move towards like an expanded definition of success. And we don't see just our standardized. We can't just see our standardized tests as our goals, right? That they are ways of like I think help us like understand the progress that we're making towards our POL. They're not the goal. The goal is like those sets of like competencies that you saw demonstrated within our portrait. And so I would also like while we're here, just encourage like other schools and especially like school districts more largely to take a similar stance in so many ways and acknowledge that the effect of like change just also takes time and to build like direction over speed. So oftentimes data that's I think thought of as soft data, again, as qualitative measures or informal, provides I think a more accurate, more authentic indicator of early success than many of the traditional hard data metrics. And so again, it just takes time, and like folks have to be willing to run the risk of being able to hold that up as with equal importance.
Direction over speed. Well said. You've got those are some great insights. I think that's so true. And yeah, we do need to prioritize all different kinds of data. You see, we all know about the importance of the whole child. So to simply just say one achievement metric would be measuring and calling this, our final metric wouldn't really align with why we all started this. Before I toss it to Dr. Johnson, we have had a lot of questions for you, Dr. Cannon, about these empathy interviews. Would you mind, I know I'm like putting on the spot here, but can you think of like a question from one of your empathy interviews to share with the audience? And I can come back to you if you want to think on it, but everyone has been asking more about these empathy interviews and just like kind of what they look like. So I wonder if an example question might help them.
I will say though that like we're not the experts. Like the folks who are like to do this work, our studio, who's our research and development arm, and myself as like a systems leader, we get a lot of support. We get a lot of coaching support, and we get a lot of resources from my critical friends. And so there are a few of them I do want to call out. So one is Transcend. So Transcend does this work really, really well. The earliest parts of my own development understanding of like how to build equitable models came by way like back in 2016 to 17. My first contact with Transcend. I work with the Freedom Dreams Labs currently, and they support Black and Brown leaders in thinking about how do we boldly rethink schools. And so I have them in one of my ears, and just like simply go left or go right. I have some friends at Franklin Street that work directly with our R&D arm that essentially help us build the right muscle and the right rhythms to be able to take an ambidextrous approach to rethinking how we do school. And so I will point, though I will share the sort of question that like to answer that right on, but I also would say check out my friends over at Transcend. They got a lot of like resources that are already prepared, and that schools can literally just double click on and just like hold up and run with. And so I often go to their website for resources. Often call up some of the folks that I trust that work in the organization to better understand like where do I go now? And I'm sure like those resources there will help you do the same. I'm sure they also have like empathy interview guides and such that could that you might be able to just like pick up and use. So instead of like just recreating the wheel, just like putting some cool like rims on it or something, you know? And so I will point. You should definitely point your attention there. Like one of the questions that falls in the bucket of daily life and community is how would you describe who you are? And that better helps us understand our young people's identities, the jaggedness that exists there, and kind of how they see themselves in the world. Another is like think about the time when you really learned something. Describe the experience. Where were you? Who was involved? And that gives us a better context of the sorts of experiences that we wanted to like replicate or specifically like experiment within our pilots. And so those are two sets of questions. I don't mind blasting some of that out, but also Transcend has those resources on their website. And so folks should just run over there.
Thank you. That was super helpful. I think it just adds a little bit of context. Circling back to the question that we were on there before I threw a last minute one at you, Dr. Johnson, I'd love to hear a little bit more about San Diego Unified's what gets measured, gets done, mindset. Have you all discussed the impact, measuring anything over time? Where are you all at in those conversations?
We are just beginning because this is a brand new launch, but much like my colleagues with all the brilliant things they've said about academic performance, graduation rates, social emotional climate, culture, I think the only thing I would add on top of that is an element of student-centered assessment where they're co-constructing rubrics, let's say, or using reflection and self-assessment and using that to propel, let's say, student-led conferences. It's not something we have done yet, but that's something I'd really like to see as a piece beyond us as the adults assessing them.
Thank you so much. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we utilize a student engagement survey with our 3rd through 8th graders. And so each year, twice a year, students participate in that survey, and it really helps us to measure and keep seeing, are you feeling engaged? Are you feeling tied to the learning that you're doing on a daily basis? And I loved the empathy interviews that Dr. Cannon shared too, but the student engagement survey is sort of our tool to do something similar.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think those are all excellent places to start. And as you both have kind of called out, I think you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think Dr. Cannon said you could put new rims on it, right? Like there's a lot of resources out there that you can pull up and, see what these schools are doing in the resources list in your on-demand console for today's webinar. I did put that learning and design project brief from Maureen Joy's work, which I think is really interesting. It's kind of almost like reminded me of like a case study of how you all started and where you all went in your work. There's some resources on North Shore's research as well as San Diego's in there. So I think just simply looking at their portraits, their profiles, their competencies is a really great way to start. And hey, bring those to your meetings, right? This is what they're doing in this district with this diverse population of students. What do we think about these? If nothing else, getting some places to start is always helpful.
And we made a huge investment in like the research and development arm, and we're just learning a bunch of stuff. Like again, the stuff we're learning is like, where did we fail the most? And we captured that learning. were our biggest milestones. We've captured that, and like we're just eager to share. And so if like folks were to email me and connect with the folks in our studio, they have, again, their roles are just to have like narrow and focused time to think about like how might our school be different and to run the cycles of implementation. And so we just have a lot of just like lessons learned. I see some information in the chat, like questions in the chat. I think there's some stuff that we can answer, like what happens in between like implementation and measure. Like there's something that happens in the middle. We have a bunch of stuff that we described there too. We've kind of codified as much as we can, because we recognize that like we just want to kind of offer this to other schools who are willing to take the risk. I don't think the model works for young people well. We need more schools that are willing to jump to make the big leaps. And so given that aspiration, like we just like capture the stuff. We captured all of our learning, and we can't wait to share it with folks.
We are heading into the last about 4 minutes of our webinar. So I'm going to pull one question out of the Q&A here that I think is a good wrap up for us. But I just want to reiterate what our amazing panelists have shared, that this is a journey. It's a continuing conversation. I'm sure we could spend hours going on this webinar and dig into every question. And I wish we had the time to do that. But I want to just address kind of a wrap up question here. We so appreciate everyone's questions, and yeah, we'll keep the conversation going certainly after this, because it is an ongoing journey. I think this is a great way to hear from each of you and wrap up what you've shared. This question came in, it's just, what's the most surprising outcome of creating a portrait of a graduate? Dr. Johnson, did you want to start off?
Yeah, there's been so many surprising aspects, but I would say I think we were surprised by how many opportunities there were to use this as a touchstone for other things that we were trying to make headway on, and having it really be embedded in everything that we do, every conversation, and the way that having students being so heavily invested in the production of it, the creation of it. What we were surprised by is how much they were looking forward to it being launched. Like they were like, are we coming yet? Are we ready? Do we get to go speak to principals? Like we were surprised by how eager they were to launch the work and get it moving.
That's so powerful. Lexi, I see you nodding your head too, so I'll just toss it to you next.
I'm with that. I think the excitement around the portrait of graduate, not just from students, but from staff members as well, and really giving that roadmap of, okay, we're here for a purpose, and this sort of just helps to guide our purpose in the same direction.
Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Johnson, I'll throw it to you. I'm sorry, Dr. Cannon, I'll throw it to you last. You started us off at the beginning of this. So what's the most surprising thing that came out of the portrait of a graduate for you? Excuse me.
Hey, y'all, change is really hard. I'm sure we all know this on this call. Like getting people to strategically abandon like things that have known and have had like been tried and true to like do something radical and different and big is like really, really difficult. And managing that is even harder. And so I think one thing that's come as a surprise is that like how much ownership young people and the adults have taken over some of our experiences. We run the pilots, folks are coming out like, we could do this next, and we could do this next. And then that has helped build the level of excitement for our portrait. And then like also now those folks who are like, may have had some ambivalence in the front end are now like key like evangelists, if you will, and who are like, no, we should try this, and now expressing the portrait has moved outside of the pilots. So now we have folks who are just trying things, young people who are like radically advocating in new ways. It's been great to kind of see how naturally like things have kind of have taken form, and so some of the reluctance have kind of like faded because of the level of excitement that people have for the portrait.
I love hearing that, and it's so special that each of you have seen such a positive reaction from the community and the students, because they're the ones we want to prepare, right? This is all at the end of the day to better our students in their future, and it's just such meaningful work. So thank you so much to each and every one of you for being here. I know it's the end of the school year, you're tired, you've had a long year with students, and you're just sharing so much valuable information and expertise on your journeys with the community who's here with us today. So just thank you for being here and just authentically sharing your experience and your journey. We really appreciate you. To our attendees for the engagement, there's so much engagement, it was hard to keep up with. Thank you for bearing with me as I tried to do so, and for joining us at this webinar, also at the end of your school year. If you'd like to learn more about how Otus can help you to track future readiness metrics, I do have a visual on the screen here to just kind of give you a high level overview. But you can visit us at otus.com. We'd love to also invite you to our live demo so you can see Otus in action if you'd like. We are doing that tomorrow. I'll just pop that in the chat if anyone is interested just in learning more about how you can track some of those future readiness competencies in our platform. So we'd love to see you there. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. That concludes today's webinar. You will get the recording by email, share with the colleagues, spread the word, and all the amazing things these 3 leaders are doing. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.